Hey guys, it's Jackie here, the Nerd Mom, and today I am making what I like to call lovingly my white girl carnitas, or shredded pork, in a Mexican style. Why do I call them that? Well, I know that real carnitas are made where you brown the bits over the stove and then you roast it low and slow in a stock pot kind of thing. And I've never made them that way, but I also just don't have time for that. So here is my version, and I use these for so many gatherings, so many occasions. So the first thing you do, of course, got a crock pot. I believe this is a 5-quart crock pot. I tend to make my meat more in a technique and less in actual measuring. So I'll give you some measurements, but they'll change based on how things look and the size of your roast and all those fun things. So I do this in 2 layers. My first layer, I put in, this totally seems like it's cheating, but I put in some powdered chicken stock. I know you're wondering why I don't just use real chicken stock, and the reason is I don't want more liquid. I just want better broth. So I use about, I'm at the very end of mine, I use about a tablespoon, and I just sprinkle it in the bottom. Because when your meat starts giving off all its lovely, lovely juices, it will help enrich that, and so you can use it in other things later. It will be a fatty liquid, but it'll make your roast taste so much better, I promise. So on the bottom, I also put a little bit of cumin. Cumin, when you smell cumin, it's got an odd smell to it. My husband was not a fan when we got married. He felt it was very stinky feet-like, and I can get behind that, but I still put a little bit in my roasts. And so I use a little less than a teaspoon on the bottom, and I just sprinkle it about. It's what gives Mexican food specifically that oomph, that unctuousness, that meatiness almost. If you have pinto beans and you taste that unctuousness between good pinto beans and bad pinto beans, or good refried beans, it's the cumin. So I put in about 2 teaspoons of salt on the bottom, because part of this is what's going to not only flavor the literal bottom of your roast, but it's going to flavor that broth that's made. And that will be very important later, because as your roast cooks over the many hours, your broth is going to come up and seep into that. So you want it to be good. You don't want bad broth in there. Plus, your roast is so big, you have to season the bottom and the top, and instead of seasoning it on a plate, I season it this way. So I'm putting about a ½ teaspoon of ground black pepper. My husband always says I underestimate just how powerful ground black pepper is, so I've been cutting back lately. This is where you can tell I'm the kid who was raised with Mexican food. So I use about a teaspoon of paprika, good paprika. If you smell it and you don't smell anything, your paprika's old. Toss it. I get the Sadaf from, we have the Fresno Deli, I believe is what it's called. It's a little Armenian deli with some great prices and spices. Now my husband does not like onions. So if I was making this for someone else, I would chop a whole onion and put it in here. Jeremy doesn't like onions. So instead, I'm gonna use about 1/8 of a cup of dehydrated onions. Why dehydrated onions? Well, when I married the man, he says, I don't like onions, but he'd use onion soup mix to make like burgers and stuff like that. And so I'm like, okay, I don't know if you realize it's onion. He's like, I know. He doesn't like the texture of fresh onions that get cooked down that kind of slimy. So dehydrated is great for him, and you need that onion to really add something to your roast. And then here I have a roast. This one is a pork shoulder blade roast, and it's almost 6 pounds. Any cheap pork roast with fat will do. I usually buy the big bagged roast from Costco that range for under $2 a pound, and there's 2 big roasts in it, and I run 2 crock pots at a time. But today we've got this, it's got a bone in it. Just as an FYI, this was an issue in one of my other cooking videos. The USDA says when you get a roast like this, do not rinse it. Put it on your plate and pat it dry. None of us like the slime. I got you, it's kind of gross. But if you put it in your sink, if you take it around your counters, you are going to cross-contaminate your entire kitchen. Whereas when you put this in the crock pot and turn on the heat, the heat will actually kill pretty much anything that could be living in there. As long as you are cooking your meat 100% cooked and you're not going to try like a rare pork, as long as you're above medium rare, you should be fine. So don't rinse your roast, just pat them dry. I know this is going to cause arguments because the video I seriously did like 4 years ago, people are still fighting about whether or not I should have rinsed chicken thighs. So put this into your crock pot, put it fat side up. And that way, as the fat melts, it melts down into your meat. Give me 1 second. I need to rinse my porky hands. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. I washed my porky hands from putting my roast into the crock. And literally, it's called a crock. Now we're going to season the top of the roast, similarly to what we did in the bottom. Once again, these are rough measurements. You need to judge how spiced you like everything. This is a pretty mild spice. This is not going to pack a huge kick the way I'm doing it today. So I'm going to put another 1/8 of a cup of dehydrated onions on top. Once again, if I was cooking for somebody who didn't mind onions, fresh onions, I would just put the other half of my chopped onion on top there. Now, I put a little bit more seasoning on the top than I did the bottom. So I'm going to put about 2 teaspoons, I can get it back out, of paprika. And you're going to go through and you're going to sprinkle this. And don't worry if it's not perfectly even. As everything starts to melt down, it'll all get mushed together. I promise it'll be fine. I like lots of salt. When you watch a cooking show, they say, add a good pinch of salt. They don't literally mean a little pinch of salt. If you've watched those cooking shows, they like put in like all their fingers and do a big pinch of salt. This is not going to be consumed by one person. Do not worry about it. So I'm going to put about 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt over the top also. I know it sounds like a lot of salt, but once again, it is not going to be consumed all by one person. This is for a lot of people. How I use these roasts is tonight. They will be served, everything will shred out, and we will do the shred over rice with broccoli and cheese, and that'll be tonight's dinner. I just put in 1.5 teaspoons of cumin. And then I will take some of the leftover roast and I will mix it with some leftover rice and cheese, and I will actually roll burritos. And that's where that broth that you get in here, I always say reserve a little bit in the fridge. That way when you're mixing something up later, if it seems dry, add a little bit of the broth that is left over and reserved in. So this is about 1 teaspoon more of ground pepper. And basically you're done. My last ingredient is a little less than 1/4 cup of water. We don't want a lot of water added to this because we want a nice thick broth. But we do want a little bit to stop the roast from sticking and burning when you first turn it on. And it'll just help, it helps get the process going. If you don't add liquid, it is not a big deal. I've just always started it with a little bit. And especially since this is a good sized roast and it's like touching all my sides and stuff, I want to get that broth going. Basically, I'm going to put this in my crock pot. I'm going to turn it on low, and I'm going to come back. I love how everyone says, I'm going to come back in 6 to 8 hours. In reality, I'm getting started a little late today. It's about 10:30, and I have a meeting tonight. So I will be back before 5 o'clock, and I will be showing you a little bit more of this yummy, yummy goodness. This is what it looks like, and it is going into the crock pot low and slow while I get on with the rest of my day. See you in a bit. Here it is, the main event. This is why you're really here. Not to see me, but to see how this pork turns out. Isn't that gorgeous? Now, all you need to do is you can pull off any extra fat that's on top and pull it aside like that. You can see that little bit of fat there. And just run your fork through it. Actually, normally I'm a little bit more coordinated, but I'm reaching around a camera to do this. And you just shred that out. And see, it's just falling off that bone, literally falling off that bone. Look at that unctuous, yummy fall apart. Just delicious, delicious pork. And this is great at anything you would use a shredded meat in.